on scaling up women's enterprises, incubating and empowering. We are very sorry for the delay. We are around 10 minutes late for the session to resume. I heartily welcome the moderator of this session, Anjani Kumar Singh, Senior Program Officer, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in India, to take his place on the stage. Anjani, can we have you on stage? Thank you so much. I would also like to invite our esteemed panelists on stage for this session. We have Sharon Buteo, Executive Director, Lead at Kriya University. Welcome. We also have Samik Sundar Das, Senior Rural Development Specialist, the World Bank. Our next panelist is Chetna Gala Sinha, Founder, Chairperson, Mandeshi Mahila Bank and Mandeshi Foundation. And our next speaker and the fourth speaker is Dr. Yamini Atmavilas, President, Udaiti Foundation. Can we have a big round of applause for our panelists? Thank you so much for joining us in this panel discussion, and we look forward to your perspectives on women in enterprise, impediments in the marketplace. With this, I hand over to the charge to Anjani to take it from here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Great to see. House is not as full as it was the previous session, but still, having so many people staying back for this session, So thank you so much for staying back. We have the session, called Scaling Up Women Enterprises, Incubating and Empowering. I think we had the previous session also around women's enterprises. We'll see how we build on the previous conversation that we had. Also, we have a very esteemed panel, who represent both academic world, researchers, practitioners, and all. So we'll, it will be lovely to hear their thoughts around scaling of women enterprises. As you know, this is a very interesting topic that we are going to, discuss. In terms of the format, I would suggest that because already we are running around 10 minutes late, we will, focus on more conversational kind of rather than, lectures. So I would request all the panel members to be brief, and also we'll have a 2 rounds. So first round we'll have around 4 to 5 minutes each one, and then we'll come to the second round where around 2 to 3 minutes, for the final comment. We would also, because panel, the audience also would have several questions related to the scaling of women enterprises. So we will spare the last 15 minutes for listening to the audience, and if there are any questions from their end, we would request the panel member to respond to that. Before I go to the panel, I think I would not take more than 2 minutes to just brief the topic. As you might have heard in the previous session, I think only around 20% of all the medium and small enterprises in the country are owned by women. And the women, as you heard in the previous session also, they face multiple challenges in terms of in general life, but when it comes to the running the enterprises, the whole challenges further multiplies. Most of these women enterprises also are in the informal sector. They might not be registered under any legal provisions and all, and and very few of them probably employ additional labor. So most of them are work in a self-enterprise space. But at the same time, we also know, and everyone is talking about it, that if the next generation growth in the country is going to happen, through the increasing participation of women into the a larger economy. The Indian population is stabilizing. So if India has to continue to grow uh, by 7 to 8% growth, it would not happen unless until we get more women into the either enterprise ecosystems or in the labor ecosystems and all. We have also know, that women entrepreneurs employ more women. I think there is a study which says that women entrepreneur employ 3x more women than the male enterprises. So with that context, I would start with Sharon and request Sharon. Sharon, you have a deep interest in this whole space. You have been writing. You have been talking about about the women enterprises. Uh, can we hear from you in terms of who are these women entrepreneurs? What are their persona? What are their archetypes? And how these understanding of these women entrepreneurs would help us in scaling up these women enterprises and all. If you could throw some light on that, I think that will be very, very helpful. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Engineer, and thanks for inviting. This is one of my favorite topics. I'm always at a loss to what to answer the questions because often the crowd probably knows even better than me actually how to answer this. And I think there are a lot of implementers often in these events, and they're on the ground doing the work. So I'll respond to best to my knowledge per my understanding. But what I would say is that this ideal of segmentation has been repeated for several years. So what I would say is that yes, we can segment, we can have bold ideas, but we need bold action to go with it. So segmentation is a fine thing. The other thing is the topic itself, scaling up. How do we scale up enterprise? First, I just wanted to go back to the definition of entrepreneur. An enterprise is made to address a market gap, no? So the ideal is to create enterprises. You need to figure out where is the gap, where an entrepreneur can fill in. So while the ideal of having a lot of women occupied, like entrepreneurship doesn't come in a toolkit per se. So we tend to mix a little bit the livelihoods that goes ahead and say, okay, let's scale up this thing. The other thing is that, so you can scale up women enterprises, but you also need to scale up the ecosystem that goes with it. So if you equip these women with what is required, sort of like to help build entrepreneurs, but if they're not addressing the appropriate markets where they can actually scale, or they do not have the system that equips them to scale, you're not as well going to have any dynamic flow in the current system we have. So you have put these numbers, 20%, women entrepreneurs. In general, actually, when you look at women entrepreneurship, it's the combination of two big problems in India. So one is jobless growth. The number of entrepreneurs in India, everyone knows this, 64 million, is not changed in decades. When you look at over time, the contribution to GDP and all that stuff, there's nothing that moves the needle in a sense. So we're just like moving the system. So our knowledge and things like that is not being integrated as well. And then when you add the complexity of women entrepreneurs, which they can contribute, it's not clear, how you can do that because it comes with their own set of problems. And when you start looking at the segmentation, what I come to, you start to understand. So the thing is that even before segmentation, understanding how entrepreneurs respond to markets, how do they fill gaps? B, understanding how the scaling the ecosystem is there alongside that, and understanding as well, the role of women in society and how they can grow. So coming back to your 20%. So when you look at those 20%, most of the women are really at the tail end of the thing. Like they're really below 10,000 rupees a month turnover. And when you look at a lot of the data, it's concentrated, it's pretty stable, no? And I've done that in several cases where you try to understand how women flow in ecosystems. So one thing is that there's a problem that's even particular to women compared to men, because men are able to, even if enterprises don't grow, when they're very tiny, they're able to grow to a certain level. They stagnate, but at least they go up the chain. For women, they start like this. About 40% of women start like that, and then you see they're not able to grow. And so maybe some 15% of women are not able to stabilize. So the characteristics of the women who are in this small cluster below 10,000 rupees, they're invisible. Most of them, because of social norms, and I think Yami will tap into that, they're at home. They don't have a shop. They're inside. They're working hard, they're multitasking, but they're not visible. So how can you help them? So the first segment is invisible. It's at home. It's the one where we're trying to layer on e-commerce platforms, but a platform won't solve the problems for these women. So I would say 40% of the women are home-based business, trying to be occupied, trying to revive their career, or kind of like thing. And then you have another category, which actually is the dominant one when you look at the micro enterprises, is the sole entrepreneurs. I would say that's about 25%. So you have 40% below 10,000 rupee turnover, home-based business. Some make things just to become occupied. Then you have a little bit solopreneur. They might have help. They might be doing business with their husband and things like that. Still, the turnover is very low. And then you have very few that graduate that actually create jobs for people. So in terms of segmentation, I think it's more dichotomic almost. No, you have a bunch of women who are invisible that we need to bring at the forefront, that have many ideas. We need to understand how really leveraging technology, how to really tackle issues that are systematic for them, how to also fix the entrepreneurial systems this way everyone can grow, and how to also tackle at the national level this issue of jobless growth and stagnation for small businesses. So there's many challenges there, but I would say in terms of segmentation, it's like women have to go over that slump, that start not being invisible. I think that would be, and when you start being visible, then you tap into the other challenges, like your solopreneur, how do you get one other employee, etc. So I hope I answer your question on a grander, on a scale like that. I hope that's useful. Yeah.
I think that's very helpful to understand who are these women entrepreneurs. They're not like a monolithic group. Within that, there are a lot of segments, and each segment would require a different kind of a incubation on acceleration support and all. And that's why this segmentation, this persona and archetype is very, very helpful to understand which are these women entrepreneurs and all. Yeah, and let me go to the now another end. My ex-colleague Yamini, again, she has been working on these issues. I don't know from lifetime, mission in terms of understanding the various social norms that these women face. And again, when it comes to the women entrepreneur, they face additional challenges and all. So I would request Yamini to highlight in terms of the various barriers and norms, related challenges that the women interface, and then how, especially Yamini, if you could also highlight in your experiences, how we can deal with those and how entrepreneurs can, deal with those norms and all. If any insights on that would be really helpful.
Thanks, Anjani. I'll try to respond to that universe of questions in 2.5 minutes. But I think just building on what Sharon said, it's really critical to take a, whether it's segments of entrepreneurs, segments of revenue of the enterprise, or even life cycle of women, right? Like, I think that's the piece that we often miss out in that, even as we break the homogeneity of what makes up a woman entrepreneur or a self-employed woman. I think all these definitions are kind of now collapsing a little bit. I think this understanding that gender norms actually delineate and underline how women are able to engage livelihoods, are able to engage markets, are able to engage access to finance, etc., etc. So I think those institutional structures are very, very life cycle specific. Whether you're a young woman, you're a woman in the reproductive age group, when you're a mother, etc. So I think those economic lives and the social and gender those lives kind of collide sometimes. That's number one. I think number two, there are very common factors that are barriers to both male and female entrepreneurs, such as working capital, initial capital, working capital, market access, what's the right sort of capacity, that they need, the skills that they need, the confidence, the sort of negotiation skills and so on. But I think this group does not need to be sort of convinced that I think women entrepreneurs have additional both disadvantages as well as certain kinds of advantages when it comes to certain sectors. Now that's that's a double-edged thing, where on the one hand you have sectors that seem to be more female dominated and have lower entry barriers for women, but on the other hand they get crowded into those sectors and they're not necessarily the sectors that are able to graduate into the kind of scale and both in terms of revenue and income growth, and on the other hand, the kind of scale that we'd like to have more women into those sectors. So I think those traditional sectors are textiles, agriculture, handloom, food processing, etc. Now, the barrier there is that digital and fintech are graduating those sectors into more interesting spaces. So you're seeing these new generation kinds of cloud kitchens, etc. Now, where do they come from? They come from the basic skill and the capacity to cook and run a kitchen and to sell that in the market, right? And so the variables are very similar, but then because you have digital platforms, you're able to actually then graduate into another segment of that economy. And as I think Sharon rightfully pointed out, just creating more platforms is not going to solve for that gap, right? So then how do you take women along to these newer versions of those traditional sectors is something we should solve for. And I think there are both normative as well as just institutional barriers to that. A third, I think, is something that the previous panel talked about, which is this whole challenge of time and time poverty. So I think we've sort of tried to solve more and more for the doorstep, lack of mobility and more doorstep sort of services, but we haven't quite figured out how do you do that when women have limited time, you can't attend like 5-day incubator programs, etc., etc. Like, what's the alternative for that? And we know digital is somewhere part of the solution, but we know that there are also challenges for women to access digital and to leverage digital skills, digital literacy, and therefore the world that digital can open up for women who lack time and who have the aspiration to grow. The fourth, I think I would say, is service provision. So I think we've done less on that. I think we work more and more on empowering women, but then that's only half the story. I think the providers of services, the finance, the banking system, the entire ecosystem, the market system, they have to meet women halfway or maybe 75-80% of the way, and that's simply not happened. We don't have enough data. I think we need to we only have microfinance data, frankly, as we try to understand what's the credit gap, gender credit gap, etc. And I think it's not sufficient anymore. So for different segments of women entrepreneurs, we need to have a better understanding of what else is there, and where are the where may be systemic breakdowns and where are the biases that kind of come in, and the assumptions about women's ability to absorb, etc. I think microfinance programs have established women are bankable, women are able to run enterprises, but I think we need to do more, and therefore how do you act differently, right? And the final point on this is just whole question of formalization itself has many challenges. And so I think we have to really unpack all the different pathways to formalization and see what are the desirable parameters there, and where do things break down, and how do you actually bolster those kinds of breakdowns so that you actually have women able to access more. And I think the challenge of scaling therefore is twofold. One is, how do you get more women into this so that there's less instability and that more women are able to do this. Not necessarily grow big, not everyone can grow big, and so how do you just create that wider base. And then for the ones who are aspiring to grow, what are the growth challenges? So that's that's a second sort of scale problem. I think that especially on that growth trajectory, we need to do a lot more work, both on the credit side, on incubators, accelerators. I think there's more talk now on gender smart accelerators. How do you build accelerators and these kinds of programs that are way more tailored to both the normative barriers as well as the more structural barriers. But I think we're not there yet. I think they're very limited and very small scale, and there's a lot more that needs to be done. So let me stop there for the first question. I don't know if I have time to get to, or I can wait for the second round to get to like how to solve for it. I don't have any answers. I think I'll turn to Chetna for that.
No, we'll find the answers collectively, and we'll come to you in our second round as well. But I like this whole idea of gender smart incubator and accelerator. I think that should be you know uh, you know uh, should go and become viral in the in the social media. Now, coming to Chetna, ma'am, I mean, when it comes to the women, enterprises, uh, the capital and finance is one of the major challenge, and and you realized that much earlier, and founded the first women rural bank. If you could share your experiences, that how the bank and the Mandeshi Foundation has been able to deal with some of these capital and finance related challenges for both setting up the women enterprises, as well as when it comes to the growing phase of those women entrepreneurs and all.
Yeah. Thanks, Anjani, and thanks for inviting me, Bipin. So, regarding as you questioned about the challenges of finance and capital, I, from my own experience of setting up the bank, and actually when we set up the Mandeshi Bank, it was in a rural area, and it was not for microcredit actually, or not for JLG also. It was for lending for individual savings and lending for individual women. And when we did that, and when we started this, the challenge was not that women were not knowing. The challenge was bankers were not knowing. Bankers did not even realize that if we lend to women and women who are owning the enterprise, what should be the product, what should be the credit product for that, because they don't know the cash flow of those businesses. So I saw that it was important for me to train up bankers to understand the cash flows of women who are doing businesses, women who are running enterprises, women who are, so because in India, in banking sector, the bankers know the cash flow of salary earner, bankers know the cash flow of labor force, because those cash flows are much formal, easy, very stable. Whereas when it comes to business, the cash flows are very different. That is number one. The second challenge I saw again was that in business, you require a working capital. In business, your capital is changing daily, right? So, how do you design the credit product? So, that was another challenge. The third is that in while you are setting up the enterprise and when you are taking a asking for access to capital or a loan, what would be your repayment, or how would you do that? I mean, what would be the tenure of the loan? What would be the repayment of the loan? So I'm not getting into details, but what I'm trying to say is, and it is not only with micro enterprise, unfortunately, in our country, bankers do not know how to provide an access of capital to the businesses, because it is a tough job. I'm getting salary, then it becomes easy. So here I would actually accept that we had to learn from our women. And what we did was that I would like to give you an example, that we did the diaries of our women who are running the business to understand what is their cash flow, what is their requirement of the loan. Based on that, we designed the product. So that was one challenge which about capital I'm talking. Now, because our session is on incubating and scaling the micro enterprise, so I would just like to share one very recent thing which we are addressing that challenge, and it has been very fascinating learnings from that. Is that when women set up the business and when they start the business, generally what happens is that as Yamini, you mentioned about the social norms. But when they set up the business, start the business, and scale the business, the first thing they have to listen is, you won't be able to do it. From house to market, and I'm not criticizing government, because उनको नहीं समझ में आता है जल्दी, but घर से, in house, in market, everywhere, where agar that lady is setting up the business, the family will say, if there is any losses, we are not going to bear it. The doors are open for you. So it's not just that she has to take a risk, but she has to overcome that fear of losses. Nobody is going to support me. Then the market, we have so many women at Mandeshi Bank, Mandeshi Foundation, where they want to scale the business. They have actually sorted their quality control and everything. They want to buy a machinery. The machinery vendor will say, you won't be able to handle the machinery, bring your husband. And she's telling that I am running the business, not my husband. I know my business, what it is. But still the vendor will say that. And we have supported our women and created that whole ecosystem, that where to see the machinery, how to handle it, because they know quality control. So that is the approach when she, what are the experiences when she gets, when she start the business. And lastly, I will just say that it is not only access to capital, it is not only access to market, it is access to machinery. And we were surprised that in India, when we found out that if these women want to scale their business, scale their production, and if want to buy machinery, which are the locations, where do they get it? It was only 4 locations in India, these type of machineries, which has a micro enterprise or a small enterprise. Coimbatore, Rajkot, in Maharashtra, Ichalkaranji, and in Punjab, which are agro-based machineries. So it clearly also indicates that the whole ecosystem is so weak that if they want to scale, you don't even get the machineries. And Mandeshi had to actually tell vendors, we will provide you loan to scale your business to sell the machinery. Create that system. And also, we will provide you the clients to sell the machinery, but you do this business, otherwise, our women will not go towards the journey of climbing the scaled enterprise. So I would just stop here. And I would just say that I am fascinated by women in such a situation also. You will see our women in last 3 years, 7,000 women bought the machinery and scaled their business. And they took that risk in the fear of that you may bear losses. So आखिर में मैं इतना ही कहूँगी कि अगर महिलाएं, if you want women to scale the business, provide your shoulders to them. अगर losses हुए, तो we will be there to support you. Count on us. We will be there every time you need us. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for sharing such a inspiring, a story. And that's a good segue to move to, our next panel member. Samik, you have been again working in this space from quite some time, and the organization that you represent, the World Bank, is a big investor, in building the women's enterprises. So one side is, while building the individual and collective enterprises, but it's not that just they need one thing. There are challenges at the social norm level, gender norms, the access to finance. So how do we, banks thinking around building the whole ecosystem, for promoting large scale women enterprises and all. I think you also lead several World Bank projects in different states at the national level. If you could share your thoughts and experiences around that.
Thank you, Anjani, and good afternoon, everyone, and good to see you all again, friends, here on the panel. Uh, I think a couple of things, statements in the beginning. First of all, we need to see, as a country, our economy is, if you see the structural changes that are happening, is huge in terms of the agriculture, how agriculture is contributing, and 61% of our labor force are still in agriculture, and that's a huge challenge that we're seeing how they're moving out. In terms of labor force market, job markets, the situation is very different than what it has been over the years. Now it's very challenging, and with climate, overall the climate challenge is also hovering around us. So let's keep that in mind when we talk about entrepreneurship and ecosystem development. I think from the macro side, if we have to keep that in focus. Then the other aspect I would like to talk about is that when we're talking about women entrepreneurship in particular, then we cannot negate the SSG platform at all, because I think in India, the 120 million women, if it been mobilized into a institutional platform of SSGs and the federations, then there is a good starting point to focus on how to work with women. And I think that is when we were, as a team, given a challenge in with our management of not doing SSG program anymore. We're getting away to do something which is beyond SSG, and then which will create localized jobs, which will build entrepreneurship and work on enterprise ecosystem development. And most of the issues, problems that we have discussed about are the similar things we were also thrown at to work: access to finance, social norms, business development services, mentoring support, and how do you bring about growth in enterprises that you can create localized jobs. That was the challenge that was put to us, and keeping that in mind, we started developing some project, which is the National Rural Economic Transformation Project with MORD, or the Tamil Nadu Rural Transformation Project with the Department of Rural Development Tamil Nadu. So all these projects are trying to address various of these problems that we are looking at. The question of scaling up is in two front. Is it scaling up of number of enterprise, or 20% to 40% of entrepreneurs who have got registered in the Udyam portal, or it is about the business volume expansion of individual businesses that we are working on. So you have to look at scalability from two perspectives. One is from individual business perspective, and other is from number of enterprise that are getting formalized. So I think we are trying to work on both sides. Basically, if that is the way you want to contribute to the growth and economy and create jobs, you need to look at both sides of it in terms of numbers you want to grow with and the volume of business you want to grow with. So with that, we try to, let me take the example of a project to basically explain how we are trying to achieve, because it's more important to understand what are the pathways and what are the problems we are facing in the strategies we are developing in our projects. So particularly in the Tamil Nadu case, we thought that it is very important to understand local economy before we start enterprising. So we did this overall exercise of understanding something called a district level. We did some district diagnostic studies to understand what are the priority sectors, priority commodities which we need to work with. Then we did some very participatory exercise at the panchayat level called the participatory growth plans, which converted into village investment plans. For each business, each village, we have a business investment plan there, exactly knowing what is the potential of entrepreneurship development in this village and what are the other things we can do. What challenge we faced was to move out of a SSG group based finance to a individual enterprise financing, which is a huge shift in our approach we have been working with. We have never been doing individual financing and always been doing group based financing through SSG or through. So that entire systemic shift we have to do and explain to both the public sector players as well as banks, the private sector also, that you need to shift away from this group based finance. And that is already established now. The SSG based bank linkage program is established, and the CIF based community financing is already established. Now you tell them, now you move to go international, to go to individual enterprise, what you spoke about, it's a huge shift, and that required a lot of capacity aspect, skill aspects to be brought in, understanding of business and all that. So so that's what a major challenge for us, but we could come up with a kind of a financial product called the matching grant program, and we have been working with various formal financial institution, and this program has taken off in the last, say, 6 to 7 months. Unfortunately, madam, we would like to know that bankers have positively responded to it. Around, Ganesh is here, who is managing the part of the program from Tamil Nadu. Around $10 million have already flown into the system with a 3 million support of matching grant. So that's the way it started happening. So that's access to finance address we are doing. Then we started this last mile business service development centers, which we are calling them the one-stop shops or one-stop facilities, and they have been equipped, and there are personals there who are able to really work with the help of enterprise professionals at the community level to provide that support and also bring a network of mentors to each of these individuals. So overall, what we are seeing, the challenge again here is that it's very easy to target nano entrepreneurs whom we are defined as up to 5 lakh investments, 1 to 2 jobs. That is the nano entrepreneurs. But when it comes to micro, which we are targeting around 500, it's very difficult to find out micro and move to micro. And then we have small, which is plus 10 jobs who can create, and above 20 to 30 lakhs of investment. So I think it's in what we're doing in the SHG platform itself, to look at who are the potential growth individual in the SHG network to invest in, basically, and then help them go through this process of various interventions, and that is starting to show results now. I think it took us a lot of time with the COVID and all to really establish this platform. They're all in a integrated digital platform now, which we could present maybe next time and show you how it has all come together. I'll stop here. I can go on and on and on with a lot of examples on the ground. But I think they're also what we're looking at before going into one of the question which came the last thing, that we are also looking at aggregations as business enterprises also. So which is also enterprises, group enterprises of the particular activity, and also with FPOs and producer companies on non-farm products as also as enterprises there. I'll stop here, but I can add more as we go along.
No, thanks, Samik. And it's so heartening to hear that okay, bankers have started responding to the at least some places in some form the needs of the women enterprises and all. And I hope they would do more in the future and all. But as I think the Chetna ma'am talked about, that they not only need the finances, but they need many more other support systems and all. And this whole for large scale entrepreneur, we here in the country, the whole startup ecosystem, other kind of accelerators, incubators. But when it comes to the the grassroots women entrepreneur, the whole, the business development services, the market support, business planning, I think that ecosystem is completely missing. uh, I mean, Sharon, you have been again working, in those space. Any experiences, any thoughts around that? That how do we, scale up that ecosystem? Not only the financial ecosystem, but also the whole ecosystem which provides the non-financial support services to the the grassroots women entrepreneurs.
Thanks a lot, Anjani. I hope I can add something of value. There's one thing I wanted to add on the social norms to club. But, so one thing that's very distinct in India, and I'm taking from my international experience, is women seem to be having to ask permission to succeed here, in a sense. We can often see women that they can do more, but there's this mentality of women, oh, you have enough, you should be proud of what you've done. You don't need more money. Oh, I cannot grow because I cannot do more than my husband. And sorry if I'm saying out loud, but I've seen that so prominent, no? And one example I use a lot in experience is I'm Canadian, and my mother is single woman, and actually I love this entrepreneur system because my mother actually got out of poverty because she got a loan, which was similar to what your bank does. There was this trade credit union in Canada. They gave my mother at the time $1,000 loan, and my mother loved books, so she identified a market. So I'm French Canadian, and we were living in a bit in English area, and she always tried to find books for her kids. So she had this ideal, and I remember when we were a kid, we were helping my mother with the enterprise, but never I've had seen any banker, any support system, don't do too much, don't kind of like thing. And when I look here and when I discuss, and even at the banker level, I think we were at an event where there was someone from the banking industry that when I ask, and some of the data shows women get half of the credit compared to men for the same level of profit. You see what I mean? And for very similar industry. Why is that? It could be lack of ability to showcase. There's a problem with women in the banking because women do not accumulate wealth. So the same system that says, women are really good, give money to women because they will invest in their home, in their child, in the education, which is great, but it does not allow them to invest in themselves. So men would accumulate capital, will build wealth, will have assets. Women, whatever she has, she will invest in her family, and they're educated that way. Even the social system is built on the goodwill and the empathy of women. But how to build, empower, and I don't want to, like Yami said, we did a lot of work in empowerment, but just the single thing to say to women, you can succeed and you should, and give them a permission of going all the way, I think that will do a lot. And that's something that I've seen missing so many times. And myself, sometimes when I went to villages, even some places, I remember I was a meeting long time back, and we were meeting some local bankers, and I went to this man's house, and my RA, who's a staff, he said, go upstairs with it, and I can go in the kitchen. I was just like with his wife. And I'm just like, just that mentality. And that's not long ago. That was a few years ago. So that has to change that mindset. But just a single thing, educate women with the permission to succeed. Stop thinking this norm of bankers saying, you have enough money. And it starts off with the husband. Why would you bother so much stress on your thing, kind of like thing? Take care, you're okay. So I think that's the other thing. The other thing you need in the ecosystem is two perspectives. I think, so like I mentioned before, entrepreneurship doesn't come in a toolbox, actually. It comes from the ideas of wanting to fill a market gap. So it's not even gender-specific entrepreneurship, no? It's saying you can make money and you can identify something. The other good success story, I would see that my own staff, it's one of my staff actually started this Blue Tokai coffee roaster, which is very popular in Delhi. And I saw him, he didn't want to go into entrepreneurship, actually. They wanted to do something else. And him and his wife, when they came to Delhi, they said, we don't have good coffee beans. So they started to go in farmers in Chikmagalur and to say how to address the market. And they went through all the steps as well to see. So my perspective is that it didn't come from a push from outside. It didn't come from us saying, you create enterprise, you scale, or going to women's in villages and saying, start this, be occupied. It came that they identified some gap. And I think that's very critical to see, because what's happening is that there is a culture in India, in particular, this community thing makes that what your neighbor does, I want to do. So if you go in a village, and you might notice that, if one neighbor is making money to buy goats, the other neighbor will buy goats. So you have villages full of goats. And when I asked some of these people, where do you sell the goats? Some man comes and he buys all the goats. Then I ask, well, if the man doesn't come to buy the goats, what will you do? We didn't think of that yet. So the whole ideal is that systems have to be embedded, not from a welfare perspective or not just for doing good. It has to be a true entrepreneur system. You have to figure out what markets, and I think you would do favor for that. So there's one thing that you can do, and I understand scaling up on a lot of people, gainful employment. That's something that's required in India. Having women just succeed taking baby steps and doing something like entrepreneurial activity. That is very good. Even if they're part of a supply chain, like Rangsutra has that, where they have their own collectives as well, and they have women take on a piece of work. That empowers them. I wouldn't say that's an enterprise. They're not able to scale up, things like that. That's not the ideal of doing that. So I think that's one of the ecosystem requirement. It's the mindset. And I would say more than adding more anything else, infusing entrepreneur spirit in what is done, talking to private players that went through that, understanding how big brands are created. We can talk to other people. What I've seen a lot is NGO can enable
Sani,
and help.
can we hear, from others?
Oh, yeah,
I would
sorry
like
about
the
that.
other
Yeah,
panel members also to, no worries. Pick up that question, because I feel that that has been one of the biggest constraint of not having the grassroots level incubation and acceleration system, for the women entrepreneurs and all. And that is a big deficiency, because we, at least in the India, there is a huge branch network, financing system. There has been some movement, as Samik mentioned. But in terms of the whole business development services, that ecosystem, I think I still see a lot of market failure. So I would like any panel member can pick up that.
Uh, so regarding the ecosystem you are saying, and it's very, when you are talking about the women-owned businesses, and when you are talking about the women-owned businesses which either scale both horizontally or vertically, it is very interesting that I start comparing with men also. And I would just like to also share that, see that women bosses, when women start business, they run business, they scale, they employ people, which means they employ women or other staff, they are boss, right? And I see that lacking of understanding of that on both sides, supply side and demand side. When I'm saying supply side, means people, those who want to work or want to promote that ecosystem, to consider that issue, that if she is a boss and she is employing other people for when she scales the business, what is the approach? And when men is the boss, and we saw with our women, we had to tell them, as you mentioned, that you are a boss, you are going to employ other four women. That does not mean that you are going to do bossing, right? But you are going to run a business which will require a labor, which will require a particular kind of labor, which may drop out, which will require quality, etc., etc. So what I'm trying here to say is that it is, even as you mentioned, that women themselves also, they think it's very difficult for them to think as a boss. But on the other side, on the positive aspect, I would say that when women scale their business and then when they are stable, they are the best boss, because other women who work with them, they don't face that much attrition which men boss face. But one of the reason what we have seen is that because when women, other women, they employ other women, they understand the issues what other women would have. So I'll give you an example. One of our lady, Rupali Shinde, in fact, today she is speaking in one of the conference in Mumbai at AVPN. She makes a musical instrument and she employs other 5 women also. Now, these women, that is a skilled labor, right? And if one woman does not come, her business is affected. But she has trained her women so perfectly with so much of patience, number one. Number two, that when they have problem, if their child is sick, or she would manage to find the resources. So where I'm talking about the challenges of ecosystem is also that in businesses, when you scale the business, you have a staff, right? You have those people working for you, and they may have emergency, and at that time owner has to support them. I think that ecosystem is so important in business, because otherwise the laborers attrition will be very high. And that I have seen in my experience, that when women scale the business, they understand this much better, because for them, other women who is coming to the work, and if she is not in mood, her child is not well, so she will make sure that she address that issue. So I think there are these softer aspect when you are growing business, scaling business. All these things are so important. So I would just like in very summarize it in one line, that when you are making the bosses, make them resourceful in capital, resourceful in helping other, resourceful in understanding the issues, resourceful in understanding the market. Unless you make them, and there the mentoring comes. That and it is not everybody would have a very different issues, but and so that create that mentor modules are very very important. And what we can, and those modules can be designed based on a journey, because I do feel that, we give award, we celebrate women, but we don't have a small business stories of people. We have like Reliance, how it was formed, Godrej, Tata story, all those are there. But the empires which a small business people create, and how, and those are not big empires, but small empire. But what was their challenges? I think that is also important to document, so that other women who are into the business, they read it and they know that, okay, how I am going to scale it.
Thank you, ma'am. I think we have discussed enough about the whole individual enterprise ecosystems and all. But I'll go back to you, Samik and Yamni again. I mean, both of you have been working with the collective enterprise ecosystems and all, and the whole deficiency that the individual entrepreneurs have. Uh, Probably in India, we thought that okay, through the collectivization of these individual entrepreneurs, we will able to deal with some of those problems and all. So, do you think that these collective enterprises, and India has a history of cooperatives, and other collective enterprises and all, do you see these collective enterprises, women enterprises, could be as competitive, as efficient, as any other capitalist form of enterprise?
Quite loaded. Nini. S- the couple of things I would like to point out. One is, when we talking about collective enterprises, we have not thought about them as enterprises. What we have facilitated, because it's may not be the right thing to say it in this conference when it's a livelihoods India, but I think we need to move out of this livelihood mindset to enterprise mindset, right? If you want to do like enterprise promotion. And I think I'm making a statement very consciously here, because what we have been doing over the years in our work, being facilitating livelihoods of poor SSG households, and the approach we have taken in RLM and all that, is towards subsistence livelihood basically. And then we've struggled with individual livelihood, substantial livelihood, and then gone into aggregation in a very hodgepodge manner, and then we are going into this entire FPO business now, without having the enterprise side very clear in our mind how we want to go towards it. I think it's time to ask these questions today. Are we really ready to promote these FPOs or the producer or collectives we are promoting as business enterprises? And it has a different set of processes, norms, and to follow. Again, uh, uh, an enterprises, and when an entrepreneur starts a business and it is normed and it goes through the entire corporate business, it becomes enterprise, right? I think that institutionalization part of is very important, how you sift the entire business processes into certain legal forms and certain norms and regulations that you have to follow because you become a business, is for me is what enterprise is about. I think we need to build that capacity and bring those kind of aspects into our last mile facilitation process. I think there's a huge challenge there. I think we need to really think collectively in this room, who are promoting enterprise today, working with women, and we have worked with women through the SAG platform in a way. Although there are norms issues been addressed there also, but similar things are coming in there also. So I think how do you bring that and those elements, those learnings into what we want to promote? I think that is a very important aspect, and FPOs and producer collectives, in my opinion, have been more working in the input side rather than the output side of markets, and what is the market demands, what is the customer demands. Some successes are there, models are evolving, but we have a long way to go, and I think this is where we need to challenge ourselves and then think through these questions as part of similar debates going forward.
Hard to build on so many so many things that Chetna and Samik have covered. Maybe I'll change it a little bit to institutional mechanisms, right? Because I think what we think are collectives, I think we have this image that it's going to be like a manthan, it's going to be that we operate with very singular, homogeneous kind of ideas of what a collective enterprise or a collective approach to businesses should be. And I think it's quite diverse. So one is to recognize the diversity of that. A collective can be like an SAG, the way to access finance. A collective can be a group enterprise. Certainly, we got lots of good examples. They can be cooperatives, but they can also be individual enterprises that are then aggregated through some smart way by a market player or like a digital backbone, like Varun is doing. And so there's different ways that one can sort of think of how do you collectivize. There's a collectivization that either precedes the business model or collectivization that follows the business model, right? So I think there's different ways that one can see, and the goal is really the important one, which is it about reducing costs? Is it about bringing efficiency? Is it about collective market access that then makes it more possible for more women to succeed and successfully link to this? So I think that's the sort of framing that one has to just refresh, hit a refresh button on our whole idea around collectives, that it's not just about a set of shareholders accessing a certain kind of market. That's one. And I think therefore, as we start to look at what that mix of models look like, the principle is one of diversity. That you just have to have what in another field we call method mix, but I think you need a method mix and a set of strategies that will work differently for different segments, different groups. And the idea would be to take either a cluster approach, a spatially bound approach, that you're working in a particular geography, and let's bring all the diversity of strategies there, and there's a aggregator or an institutional mechanism, whether it's a block incubator, block development services, or a digital sort of aggregator. Or it's about so I think or it's about a value chain where you're trying to connect geographically and spatially disaggregated women, but then you're trying to create a common market for them. So I think those kind become super important, and I would say we are still in that journey of figuring out what is it that will work, what will work in a way that creates sustainable and continuous income flows for women, and what keeps these businesses afloat, and the cost of actually providing that kind of service. And I think that's where sometimes the rubber meets the road and things fall apart, because you're not able to sustain the cost of running these things, whether it's through a NRLM, a World Bank support, whether it's donor funded, or it's women owned, like user services. I think we need to like literally sit down and landscape some of these models to see what is it that's working and where are the gaps that one can actually start to plug in. And I think that wisdom has to flow into what the gender incubators or smart accelerators we want to create at the, whether a block level or a again at a as a digital thing, but then you have connections to Mandeshi, etc., who will actually then bring in the bottom up approach. So I think that to me feels like where the gap filling has to happen in as we think of scaling and moving to this next generation. And happy to sort of share some work later.
Thanks, Yamni. I think we are hardly left with around 15 minutes, even if I take count of the 10 minutes that we started late. But before I go to the to the audience, or can I just, everyone take 30 seconds, to just talk about one suggestion, recommendation, and not necessarily to the government, but also to the donors, to the, people who are involved in business of promoting these women enterprises. So, if anyone, everyone can just take half a minute to just suggest, pick one thing that they feel that they should be doing it.
No, go ahead. No, please.
I just wanted to say one suggestion or something is one is that not government, but otherwise, in business, there can be failures. That is one which one has to, that is, and one additional suggestion I want to say, talk, that if horizontally and vertically, if we really want to scale, no, two things are very important. Structure of the business, either it is proprietorship company or it is private limited is too complex for the last mile population. And the second is my business plan.
Thank you. I think that's a, failure is not a sin. Yes, sir.
I'll talk quickly this time. Market-based approach. Enterprise is enterprise, like you mentioned. Integrate market approaches very strongly, yeah.
I was hoping to have the last word. I would say two things. One, there's good programs. There's lots of things available for women entrepreneurs, but there is a gap even for the middle class urban entrepreneurs. There's underutilization of what's available. So figure it out and close that gap. And second, I think mentoring, we all talk about mentoring as really critical. I don't know what's the model that will work. And so I think invest and figure out what is that mix of mentoring and how does mentoring fit in, because we continuously talk about mentoring, but we are very unclear about what is it that's working.
Two things, 30 seconds only. One is don't experiment with human life on business through subsidy, because it's not, you get a subsidy, you as a facilitator think you are doing a great job by experimenting on a business with a person who may not be ready. So please be aware about that. Yeah, if you put your own money, will you do that business or not, if you're getting into any enterprise? So that's one advice. Second advice is co-creation. I think we need to really work in partnership. And we're trying our best to see how we co-create, but somehow, because if you want to achieve in if you look at business associations, if you want to bring those ethos into enterprise promotion, and particularly with women enterprise promotion, think of a co-creation model and bring around co-creation in a meaningful way and tangible way, just not talk.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think as a practitioner, I have enjoyed this conversation. I hope the audience would have also enjoyed it. Now we can go to the audience, and see if they have any questions. Yes, please. Hope we have a mic, or. And I would request you to be brief.
Yeah. So this is Mohammed Tripathi from Grameen Foundation. So we are also working in Delhi NCR only with women entrepreneurs. And these are basically early stage entrepreneurs, not in terms of age of the businesses, but in terms of business performance and maturity. So when it is coming towards upscaling and upgrading these women entrepreneurs, women enterprises, so apart from the access to market, technology, finance, scaling, we are facing very challenges in very basic three aspects. What is at the personal front, that is the sharing of responsibilities in the household work and the other related burdens and the business work. So while we are talking about with the women, why you are not expanding your businesses, so that the first thing is we don't have time, and the second thing is the comfortability and easiness and freedom to travel and freedom to work that actually require for this expansion. Second part is the perceptive front, that is the self-importance of that woman, and the confidence building amongst them to upscale. And the third very important thing is that the cognitive part, that is, it's not about decision making or ownership building, it's about the knowledge to take that kind of financial decisions, that were calculated risk decisions towards that expansion. And also the knowledge, because this is digital transformation is there, and for the women who are actually not that much educated, so the digital literacy there. And the third part is that the awareness and information towards these growth opportunities. So there are some individual efforts are there, organizations are making. I just want to know if there is any collective integrated approach to address these particular things. Thank you.
Let's take at least one more question before we. I think we have first here. Yes, please. You can go ahead.
I'm sorry.
And we'll come back to you in rest. Yes, you please go ahead. Yes. Can we have mic there, please?
Yeah.
No, here, we'll come to you. Let's.
I wanted to draw attention to Sharon's really interesting comment that women need to ask permission to succeed, and also that while it may be more justifiable for her, it's loud, no? Oh, sorry. It may be more justifiable for her to cover certain costs through her business than to accumulate. That's very interesting. And just to, I've been involved in some work in Bihar, where we've been finding that the school leavers with most chance to start their own enterprises appear to be those who are in a lot of situations of compulsion. They're in greater difficulty. So it's almost contradictory, because in some ways they have less resources, but I think the gravity of their situation justifies the possibility of actually getting stuck into business, which would not otherwise be justified. And they also may be those who have fewer men around, because there's a family of daughters, or because she's already separated from her husband, etc., etc. But I thought that was a really interesting insight. And a quick question for everyone: the role, do you have strong models of the role of existing women entrepreneurs in assisting others, either through internships or through mentors? I mean, in fact, pretty much anything in terms of support to the ecosystem of new entrepreneurs, women entrepreneurs coming into the scene. Yeah, so the role played by existing women entrepreneurs. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes. Can we have mic there, and then last here? Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. So I truly enjoyed the conversation. I think there couldn't be a better panel with the World Bank, Mandeshi, and of course Sharon from Reed Kriya research side, and BMGF, and of course the new foundation, Aditi. I want to basically talk about the credit worthiness of women. I think last 15, 20 years, when I was again back at college days, the narrative by the Grameen Bank and the research said poor, particularly women, are the most credit worthy people, and they had some fantastic numbers to talk about in terms of the repayment. Now, since the time when I came into practice and as a professional and working in the space, the narrative, at least in India, is that we tend to celebrate almost the 24 to 28% interest rates that we are offering. And the narrative around that again is that the cost of money is very high, the creditworthiness is not there, so risk is very high, and the cost of servicing is very high. So we continue to kind of, again, quote unquote, celebrate this high interest rates, which are, I think, particularly targeted at women. You spoke about how we are trying to shift from the group-based lending model to individual lending model. My worry is that we will continue to kind of burden women particularly now, because they are the targets. We are selecting women out of the SHG today, 1 or 2 per SHG. Let's give them individual loans, but at what cost, right? So would love to hear your opinion on this. And also, this narrative again around this 28% loan versus, so when do we really see this coming to sub 14, sub 12? And unfortunately, this is coming from people who would fight for 10, 20 basis points when they are going for a home loan, for example, right? So what should we be kind of, looking at as young entrepreneurs? So to say?
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Can we have the last question here, please?
Hi, thank you. Great panel and great discussion. It's interesting that the panel right before this that I was attending was on scaling business enterprises for ultra-poor women. And here we're talking about scaling micro enterprises and so on. So we're going to different stages, which brings me to my question that what really is scale when we are really defining all of this? Do we have an example from a global context that we are following? Or I would say at least let's hope we have top 3 examples. And in case we don't, and in case we are innovating, then what are the incentives to innovate for this? Thank you.
Thank you. Yamini, do you want to take up the first question, which is related to the whole mobility, time, confidence? Yeah.
But the question specifically was?
That
Oh,
if there
right,
are,
right. Okay.
yes.
I mean, you answered your own question because you seem to be through in the Grameen Foundation model actually putting all of these components together. So I would say your example is a good example. But I think they're very few and far between, and the onus actually falls on women's organizations who seem to do this rather than mainstream organizations, mainstream financiers, mainstream incubators who should do it. So in some ways, the unpaid labor of actually providing for this is also falling on women's organizations. So my very limited point is, I think the missing two components I see are the digital literacy, digital empowerment as a way for women to, I mean, now that has to become a very base skill one has to build into anything one wants to do with entrepreneurs or education or in other sort of training and education sort of fields. And I think the time component, so you talked about it, I think we've all sort of hinted at it that women don't have time, and entrepreneurship requires time commitment, and in some ways it becomes a filter, right? It becomes a filter to say you're not committed because you're not giving time. And so how do we change that narrative and reshift that? So while specific individual programs seem to be addressing this, there's a need for us to just also reshape that discourse itself around it, right? That it's not about time, but it's actually the onus is on the providers, the onus is on the ecosystem to then design for women who don't have time. Like, how do you make that possible? How do you make it successful? Because you are interested in scaling, there is an interest in pushing out capital, there is an interest in pushing out finance and meeting targets. So why not actually catch that stream and then try to see? And so I think I was telling Chetna, probably her model is also very similar in trying to account for this. So I think those who work with women's organizations or women entrepreneurs implicitly do it, but I think you have to be very explicit and actually come out with those design principles. Like, what is it that actually is making that possible? How are you working differently? But on the time front, just one limited point is also about, I think, Anjani, your last question to the panel was really important, which is what's the message to donors or to the ecosystem itself, right? And I think we're not to be in a hurry. I think I know we say that, but I think we have to say it again and again that you need patient capital, you need to wait. And businesses go through cycles of failure and success. And, one judges women's businesses way more harshly, and women judge their own businesses way more harshly. So I think, again, just plugging that into this element that it's not just about saying, okay, do better, try again, try something else, but to just make it part of, normalize that discourse. So that's how I would sort of.
Thank you, Amni. I think the next question was to Sharon about the whole role model and the important significance of the mentoring. Yeah, and if you could be brief.
Yeah. Yeah, I think people learn by example. I don't know. I think mentoring is a big question. I think nobody answered it as well.
And especially, how do we scale up this whole system of mentoring, and role modeling?
Yeah, agree. I have no answer, actually. I think we don't have a clear answer. I think there's people like WeHub is doing a good job. They have women role models. I think you need women business role models. You need, in particular, I think you need to tailor things. So you need to have, I guess, the right fit of model for the right industry, whether it's for collectives or whether it's sector or something like that. Yeah, and I think there's not enough examples. When you look at the 100 unicorns in India, there's maybe 6 women. And one thing is, in the gender space, what I notice is that just because you're a woman, you cannot mentor everybody. Because I remember once, just I'll finish. I went for an incubator, and it was Women's Day, and suddenly I was plugged into giving mentoring to a food place. I don't even know how to cook, so I don't know. So I felt bad. I think it's not because you're a woman that you can mentor. That's the one big message that I would say that I noticed. Let's have appropriate mentors. I think the right fit models. That would be my key messages, and I'll stop it there. Yeah, to be very brief. Yeah.
No, thank you. I agree with the comment on that, because I do see the whole issue of apprenticeship and internship opportunities for the entrepreneur. I think does not exist so much in the country and all us. So if you can create an ecosystem for that, I think that will be really, really helpful. Samik, I think the one interesting question was the cost of the capital and the
I thought it was discussed over the
yeah, and
last
on
2
the
days in the
interest.
microfinance, the Inclusive India Finance, the other conference. But but I think it's a good question. I will dodge the question on 24% interest because it's something which can is debatable today, but it had value when it started, I would say. And by making that statement, I know people will raise a lot of eyebrows, but I think we can discuss this separately. But when it comes to individual enterprise financing, what particularly we are trying to do in Tamil Nadu case is it is actually it's blend financing. Basically we are doing it's basically takes the interest rate down to around 7 to 8%, because the SHG individual member borrows at 11 to 12%, whatever is the market rate, and we provide a back end subsidy which reduces the capital borrowed to 70%, and they pay interest on 70%. So which is actually lowering and giving them more risk taking capacity as far finance is concerned. So that's the answer to your individual financing, enterprise financing that we are doing. Okay, so that's one thing. As for your question, on the mentoring side, one more thing we are trying to do is what we are doing in Tamil Nadu, which is worth going and seeing if you have time, is the community skill schools. Actually, basically these are ustads. Ustads are people who are in the villages, who are in the field, who have mastered the skill for a long time, and they're entrepreneurs in themselves. They run a school of 20 to 15 to 20 people for interested youth, women, to come and get trained in the school itself, in locally, and then and once that 1 month 2 month training program is completed, they can start their own business as a welding shop, or it may be grafting, a florist, or a ornamental fish shop, or wholesale. So whatever they want to do, so we are doing that. It's coming out very well, and it's provided with finance and business development service. Second thing also I want to add, that when new kind of individual enterprise financing, we are not just doing it in isolation. We are definitely making sure there is a package of business development services that comes with it, and the business planning, the orientation with the bankers, the entire value chain of financing a business is taken care of. If you bring that in, it the risk goes down, is what we feel, what we think, and that is what is the approach we are trying to follow, so that the risk of taking a loan is much lesser, is our assumption at that stage, till the time the business is successful and brings back returns. Um, on the questions, can I take her
Yeah,
question
please go ahead.
on? I think it's there are various models across the world that has been working on, if not at scale, but there are successful models. You can look at, like, I have a list of things that I cannot go through every. There are nine kind of international examples I'm holding in my mind, because I knew this question will come. So, and one is in the one of the famous one is Vinci in Caribbeans, which you can see, which was World Bank supported project. There is peer-to-peer learning, which we are working out in Uganda. There is also the Building Trust Network, which is Mekong Women's Entrepreneurship Challenge project, which is in Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. So there are various things which is done and which is backed with evidence of how these programs are working. You can look at them and see to that. But in India, definitely we are in an experimental stage. We are bringing in knowledge. We are working around scaling up, because we have not yet scaled up in any state, and we are learning through the process. And as somebody said, it's not a time bound project. It has to be looked at from a long time horizon to look at success in these areas.
One point on the mentoring.
I would
Please go ahead then.
Okay. I would just like to say one thing about mentoring and all. I do think it is the way we talk about vocational skills and all that. So in Mandeshi, what we do is that we have a special 1 year mentoring Deshi MBA program, where after that you become a Deshi MBA, you scale your business, or you start the business or scale the business. And I think it requires a little bit of structured program. It's not like if I'm mentoring, that becomes a bit loose. So no, it has to be structured. It has to be something like how you have an MBA program, but especially here you are set up. So that was one which I wanted to, and I want to address the interest rate issue. You know, Varun, you are coming from the market background. I always think that the market is best to bring down, if you really want to bring down the interest rates, at Mandeshi Bank, we never gave individual lending to micro entrepreneurs at 28%. And why? Because it was both. It was not that just earning the interest, but they will not be successful. So if Mudra becomes easily available to women entrepreneurs, it will compete with these investor driven funds which are giving 28%, and Mudra should do that. No, the public sector should compete with investor driven funds. If they do that, the rates will come down, and that is going to help so much. So I like such questions also should be raised, because we do discuss, and I do feel that it, even in patient capital also, if we are creating social impact funds and all that, why can't we have some such funds? Because Nudge can do that, you all can do that. So have such patient capital where is given for this, either revolving grant or seed capital with no interest. If multiple things come up, interest rates will go down.
Last thought.
Yeah, just one. So there's many forms of mentoring. So people view mentoring as I'll mentor your guru, and like I mentioned, I think structured program is key. So there needs to be several touch points. So you could have an overall program, but what really works for nano micro enterprise is bite-sized, just-in-time mentoring information. Else they'll have cognitive overload. So these programs work the best and with various forms. So it could be individuals, but we tested with IVRS and online and digitals that work well. But I think bite-sized mentoring, appropriate and timely, adapted to the life stage, is the one that's most appropriate.
Thank you so much. I think I don't see any more hands, and I think time is also up. So we would like to wind it up. And thank you so much for staying back. We had a fantastic conversation. We all enjoyed it.
Thank you, all the panel members, for being part of this very interesting and insightful discussion. Thank you so much, Anjani, for moderating this discussion brilliantly and for asking the right questions. In terms of the takeaways, I would say that the session has reinforced the need. There is no quick fix when it comes to scaling up women's enterprises. It has reinforced the need for systematic strengthening at the ecosystem level when it comes to scaling up women's enterprises, whether financial or non-financial services, so that the system responds better to the needs of women and have supportive mechanisms in place with integrated market approaches, investment in appropriate mentoring, and move beyond subsidies, and also to work in partnerships to co-create in a meaningful manner. Thank you so much. I would request our panelist members to be felicitated. I would also request for a group photograph. I have two quick announcements to make. One is that we have Development Catalyst Award Felicitation Ceremony happening in Inspire Hall at 6:15 p.m. So we would request you to join in. And the second announcement is that as the day ends here, we would look forward to seeing you tomorrow at 9:30 for our plenary 2, which is on reimagining SHGs, transformation to strategic business enterprises. Thank you so much, everyone. May we have a quick round of applause for our panelists?